Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Happy time this is. I am, however, more likely to talk to you about the pay crisis or the pay scandal that is engulfing the BBC and other parts of the country. We're going to begin, though, with yesterday's reshuffle. There is a slight temptation on my part to give you the number now and actually not inflict one of my interminable introductions upon you, for the very simple reason that I'm not sure I've got anything new to say compared to what I said yesterday. There is an almost unanimous agreement. It's about as close to a consensus as you ever get in politics, that what happened yesterday with regard to the so-called reshuffle was an unmitigated disaster for the Prime Minister. Now, because I have historically expressed great scepticism of both party leaders, believe it or not, if you were to tot up the comments and the opinions offered on this programme, you'd find that Theresa May has actually come off considerably better than Jeremy Corbyn. But we don't live in an era that accommodates nuance and truth. We live in an era that treats everything like a football match. You are either 100% red or 100% blue, and the very existence of grey areas is anathema to many of the people trying to frame the current political landscape. I have been much more critical of Jeremy Corbyn than I have of Theresa May. But that doesn't matter, because if you hear what you want to hear in Britain today rather than what is actually being said, then I'm on a hiding to nothing when I suggest that this was a disaster, because the correct response in binary Britain would be, oh yeah, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? So I won't say it. I'll just tell you what everybody else is saying. The Daily Telegraph calls it the night of the blunt stiletto. The doyenne of political correspondence, Rachel Sylvester, writing in the Times today, calls it a shambolic day for a powerless Prime Minister. Even the Mail has the front page, no Prime Minister, reshuffle chaos, Health Secretary turns down new job, May forced to sack Education Secretary after she refuses to move. They were, despite the fact that they're no doubt pretending otherwise today, they were briefing yesterday. There's no way Christopher Hope of the Daily Telegraph would have run this story without a steer from Downing Street. They were briefing yesterday that she was going to appoint a minister in charge of no deal. My information is that David Davis threatened to resign if that happened. More later in the programme about the latest surreal chapter in that Brexit relationship and the prospect of no deal. The Financial Times have an astonishing scoop today which effectively shows David Davis complaining about the European Union preparing for a no deal, when of course last week the idea was that we'll make them think that we're preparing for a no deal and that will make them take us more seriously in the negotiations. So now they are preparing for a no deal, and David Davis at least is spitting his dummy out. Strange times indeed, but it doesn't matter. I've worked out Brexit, by the way. I worked it out last night. I'll share the theory with you later in the programme. I now know exactly what's going on, and we won't do any more shows dedicated to the question of how can everybody else be so unconcerned about evidence and reality. I've nailed it completely, so stand by for that. You have, I think, Brandon Lewis's interview with Nick earlier notwithstanding, I think everybody sees what happened yesterday in negative terms. Everybody sees it as being a various flavour of a disaster. This is from, for example, the assistant editor of The Spectator magazine. The Spectator is a magazine to which many of the vilest strains in public discourse currently can be traced. Not just Toby Young. For me, it was a paean to Golden Dawn, a full-on Nazis that they published a few years ago by a Greek writer called Taki. I remember reading it at the time and thinking it was an aberration, that it was an anomaly. He's quite an old man, and he's a bit of an institution at that magazine. So I thought, well, they've just printed it because he's a bit of an old duffer, and you know, there's no real suggestion here that pieces endorsing actual Nazis have a place in the British media. How naive we were, eh? Got people in the British media now who actually travel all the way to Germany to address actual Nazis. So it wasn't an aberration when The Spectator did that. But this woman is the assistant editor of that magazine, a magazine where some of Toby Young's nastiest work was published. We're not going to town on Toby Young today. It's a horribly sad story. Somebody with, I think, a creditable record in the free schools area has been found quite rightly unfit for a job advising the government on universities because of publicly stated misogyny, sexism, homophobia and anti-disabled discrimination. But there's no pleasure, if you're a decent person, in seeing someone come a cropper, especially when magazines like The Spectator have commoditised being obnoxious. If you haven't managed to make it as a political commentator or a, quotes, proper, end quotes, journalist, then it's harder today than it ever has been. Then there is money to be made if you're prepared to write obnoxious things about disabled people or obnoxious things about women in general. It's our fault. He's a victim, if you will, Toby Young, of a system that has tried to commoditise being obnoxious. He's not the architect of that system in a way. I suppose we all are. But Isabel Hardman is an assistant editor of that magazine, and she quotes a Tory MP. Again, I'm doing it all from the Conservative side of the fence, just to probably as an utterly redundant exercise in insulating us against any accusations of impartiality on this, or partiality. Worst reshuffle I have ever witnessed in any party ever. None of it makes sense. It's sabotage. I think someone's trying to destroy her on the inside. I can't think of a less dramatic reason. Now, you know what we do on this programme. We look at all of the available evidence, and occasionally we apply the philosophical device made famous by Philip of Ockham, known as Ockham's razor, by which you just go for the simplest possible explanation, which will almost always turn out to be true. It's a precursor, if you like, of the Sherlock Holmes diktat that you, whenever you eliminate the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. Combine those two tactics and you've got a pretty reliable key for unlocking the reality of a confusing situation. So I think that's what we'll do today. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Everybody except people who are literally paid to pretend that black is white and that the sky really is falling in, and Chicken Licken is the meteorologist to end all meteorology. Everybody agrees that this reshuffle is either a disaster or almost impossible to understand. You cannot spin positively the refusal by a Secretary of State to do what the Prime Minister told him to do. You just can't. Strong and stable is, to be honest with you, again, because of this low-level sexism I've got that makes me very uncomfortable being rude about women, I don't want to start laughing at the strong and stable thing. I think she meant it. She hoped it would become true, but it's hard to think of a more damning definition of the opposite of strong and stable than a Prime Minister whose own cabinet won't do what she tells them. So what do you think is happening? This MP speaking to Isabel Hardman of The Spectator apparently genuinely believes, and it may be that 24 hours distance would have calmed things down a bit, but I think someone's trying to destroy her on the inside. I can't think of a less dramatic reason. I've got one. I wonder whether this is nuts, all right? Absolutely nutsoid. But to be honest, in the absence of more substantive theories, it may be all we end up with. I very, very, very tentatively suggest to you that Theresa May thinks the only way she can save the Conservative Party is for Jeremy Corbyn to lead the country out of Brexit. Otherwise, the size of the can the Conservative Party will be carrying would be unbearable. It would be a burden no political party could sustain, not least because you'd have a significant majority of the parliamentary party looking at all the people who are on the Brexit side of the debate and just going, you've got to own this. And I don't know how you can own this if we remain in the same party. If I've got to go and fight the next election as the architects and engines of Brexit, while I as an MP didn't want to go anywhere near this, I don't see how the party can survive. So Theresa May is embarked upon a course of action designed to let Jeremy Corbyn take over at Downing Street. This is the polar opposite of what we said yesterday, when her driving motivation would have been keeping him out of Downing Street at all costs. But you look at some of the stuff that's happened in the last couple of weeks, and you make that priority between country and party. What's more important, career, country or party? And then look at the cabinet. You can look me in the eye, can you, and tell me that Boris Johnson puts anything ahead of Boris Johnson when he's working out what's important and what isn't? Sadly, it would appear his little brother Joe subscribes to a similar school of thought when it comes to accountability, responsibility and explanation. We still have our question in with the Department of Education. I'll bring you any response from them in the course of the programme. And you look at some of the other members of the Cabinet and presumably arrive at a different conclusion. Where do you think Theresa May prioritises those three things? Career, country, Conservative Party. What do you think she considers to be most important? And that, I suppose, will inform your answer to the question that I'm asking, which is, what the hell happened yesterday? What do you think happened? Education Secretary spends 2 hours refusing to be moved, but ends up out of the Cabinet in a reshuffle that was designed to demonstrate how inclusive the party is. Comprehensive, educated Education Minister. I think she was. I need to double check. I like Justine Greening, actually, which is almost a definition of imminent departure, isn't it? If someone appears to be decent and sincere in this administration, you sort of know that they're going to be toast soon. So what do you think went on? In many ways, I'm not going to confine the conversation to any political perspective, but I would keep stressing that it is a unanimous position adopted by the Conservative supporting media today that what happened yesterday was a disaster. A night of the blunt stiletto, shambolic day for a powerless Prime Minister. What is your analysis of that? And I mean, how significant is it that the Prime Minister can't even control her own cabinet? There's a slight fear that if the European Commission were looking upon us as an enemy that needs to be disciplined, they'd be laughing all the way to the European Central Bank today. But of course, they know they're going to take a financial hit because of Brexit as well. Nobody is enjoying this debacle as it unfolds. Nobody at all, as we demonstrated yesterday, has a positive thing to say about what's going on. But when it comes to our Prime Minister and domestic politics, the reboot turned into a meltdown. Let's get the phone lines open. I know I said I wasn't going to inflict an interminable introduction upon you, but to be honest with you, the more interesting politics is, the more I find myself thinking out loud. It's your turn now. 03, you will get through. Be very quick. I think we've got a caller who thinks yesterday's reshuffle was brilliant. That should be fun. 0345 6060973 is the number you need to share your theory. So I've given you mine. I've given you my mad one, which is that actually they are trying to manufacture a situation in which Jeremy Corbyn has to carry the can for Brexit rather than them. And that, of course, is arguably a process that he's helping with by being so having our cake and eat it about the whole thing. 0345 6060973. I'm told that in a meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party last night, he stated two things. He stated that we categorically have to leave the single market. That's what people voted for. Demonstrably untrue. And then simultaneously described something as being a condition of staying in the single market. So they are very much trying to have their cake and eat it. But what is Theresa May up to? Not even what's she up to, because we know what she's up to. She tried to impose authority on the Cabinet. The Cabinet refused, and yet she's still in the job. That's the mystery, isn't it? If the Cabinet are refusing to do what she's told them to do, if people are refusing to resign until the clamour becomes utterly irresistible, you've got a Foreign Secretary, remember, who has broken the most fundamental precept of his office, actively endangering a British citizen abroad rather than being in office to protect them. What is going on? 0345 6060973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Because you're just as qualified to do this as any of the professionals. Your sketch, your analysis, your theory about yesterday's reshuffle that wasn't. It's 10:18. And the reshuffle that has left absolutely nobody impressed. How do you account for this curious situation? There's a consensus emerging in the tweets and the text, actually, from people of all political persuasions that I have misapplied Occam's razor. There is an even simpler and much more compelling explanation that is just rather unsexy and unsophisticated. See if you can guess what it is. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Let's start in Paddington. Nick's there. Nick, what would you like to say?
Well, you've just set me up a bit, haven't you? To be honest with you, James, I'd like to talk about baby hedgehogs. If you
Mate, you're going, this is appallingly unprofessional of me, but my headphones have stopped working. I can't hear anything that you're saying to me. Can you hear me?
Can't you hear me? Beep your Wi-Fi board if you can hear
just
me.
bear with me a moment. This is, I think, an unavoidable outbreak of the gremlins. But if I can't hear, there we go. Did I accidentally press a button, Axel? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Where were we, Nicholas?
I think only my mother calls me Nicholas. Yeah.
Carry on, Nick.
And that's when she's cross. Yeah, I think, as I said, James, I want to talk about baby hedgehogs and saving them. A year ago, you said nobody in this country cares about education. They don't care about prisons. They don't care about the economy. Let's start a campaign to save the baby hedgehogs. I've got your attention. I think yesterday was very significant because of what it means for education.
Go on.
Stunned silence. Gosh, have I shut you up? Like,
I said, go on, Nick. Should we start again, mate? Because I couldn't hear what you said at the outset. I think I may have missed your cleverness and your comedy. So talk to me about yesterday's reshuffle.
Yesterday's reshuffle. Okay, so a very good education secretary lost her job, and it would appear for collaborating, for using 21st century skills for engaging with her stakeholders, the citizens that voted for her, teachers, parents, business people. The whole school community were interested in Justine Greening, and she's gone.
Are you in the sector yourself?
I'm a dad. I'm a dad who's given his career up to work with parents and teachers and business people to help kids have the best education.
And you liked Justine. Right. You liked Justine Greening.
I'm not going to go that far. She never looked very happy.
Okay, you rated Justine Greening.
I rate anybody in the world of education who engages people and works with people.
And what do you think? What do you think she's done wrong then, from the Prime Minister's perspective?
Well, as I said, I think she, by being seen to collaborate with teachers, she is possibly cohorting with the enemy, for want of a better phrase. I don't know. She didn't have children herself. Not that I'm judging her for that, but when you have children, you have a sense of empathy.
You're completely judging her. This is quite an odd call. You'll have to forgive me. I don't remember every call to the programme. Obviously, you've gone away in the past with a grievance, but let's start from scratch. You can't say, obviously, I'm not judging her, but having children gives you empathy, because you're contradicting yourself. That's incredibly sententious. I'm interested in Theresa May's role as Prime Minister and how yesterday could have gone quite so badly. Do you have a view on that, Nick?
My view is, I don't believe, from where I'm sitting, and I haven't studied it in the depth that you have, I don't believe it's gone terribly badly. There's another positive.
Yes, go on.
Positive?
Yes.
Another positive.
Well, hang on, what was the last positive? Because you seem to rate Justine Greening and she's gone.
The last positive, James, was that we've now got an education secretary who's a father with 3 children.
But you're not judging Justine Greening for not having children.
Okay, I said she doesn't have empathy. I don't think she can empathise with parents in the way that people who have children might be able to. I'm not judging people who don't have children.
Well, except you are.
So... okay, should we move on to Matt Hancock or the new guy? Or?
No, let's move on to Mo in Rainham. Mo, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
All right, mate. It's not a full moon at the moment, is it? Did you check last night?
I did, James. I mean, on the last point of that guy, I've got a child, but even when I didn't have a child, I think it made no sort of difference to the fact of what
it makes a bit of a difference, but I don't know if you start caring about all children more when you become a parent. You probably just start caring about your own in a way that you couldn't do when they didn't exist. But talk to me about the reshuffle, because I mean, we're all citizens of the same, or subjects of the same monarch, citizens of the same country, and to have a Prime Minister in power, that it would appear, I think we probably need to zone in on one area. It would appear that she can't control her own cabinet. And that's astonishing. I can't remember a period in history that was comparable to this one that didn't involve the knives being out for the Prime Minister, but it doesn't appear that anybody else wants her job enough at this moment in time. So what do you think happened yesterday?
Well, I'll tell you, James, for me, the problem she had is she still thinks she will lead the Conservative Party into the next general election.
She said that on Mar, but remember, she's also said there definitely won't be a snap election 6 months before there was one. So, pinch of salt time, perhaps.
The one thing to, I mean, I'm not a fan of May, but to give her credit is I think she does sort of value the job and stuff, and she regards it quite a lot. So for me, I think she does want to, in her heart, she would love to lead the party into the next generation.
Why, Mo?
Because
sounds like Flymo. Sorry, I've got to grow up.
It's a job that she's wanted all her life, if you think about it, from such a young age.
Yeah, but why would... I mean, what do you do for a living?
I'm a firefighter.
Are you any good at it?
I'd like to think I am, yeah.
Imagine you were rubbish, all right? Imagine you didn't know one end of the hose from the other. And every time...
I'd quit.
Well, this is what I mean. Every time you went out on a call, you ended up blowing a cat out of a tree with a hose pipe because you'd read the memo wrong instead of going up on your ladder and helping it down. And when you turned up at a fire, you accidentally pressed the wrong button and you ended up pumping an accelerant into the empty, burning building. Why would you then want to be watch commander? Why would you then want to lead your patrol into the next big crisis, the next big emergency? That's what I don't understand about her.
And the thing is, for me, though, James, the thing is, the problem she has is there'll be people that support her and stuff that still obviously want her to be Prime Minister because of their jobs and stuff like that. And she's trying to keep the Brexiteers and the Remainers both happy.
But she's not doing that. We discovered that yesterday. The Remainers have a modicum of support for her position because they think that the ones who, like me, think that she's embarked on damage limitation. But that's a fraction of the country. An awful lot of people dismissed that theory yesterday. The Leavers don't like her at all because she is the one who is in charge as reality bites, as it becomes clear that none of the stuff that they thought they were going to get is going to happen. So they have to start pretending what they wanted all along was just a blue passport and a free pass for being racist. So they don't like her. They don't rate her. Remainers don't rate her because she's not putting the brakes on. Who does? Who is she Prime Minister of, Mo?
I mean, that's the thing, though. She has got. I mean, if you say the Brexiteers hate her, she has done some stuff for Brexiteers. You've got things like James Cleverly, who's now obviously Deputy Chairman. She's got Esther McVeigh, who, I mean, that's a shocking thing to promote her to DWP, but she's a Brexiteer. She's still got Chris Grayling on side.
But that's picking a team. That's not tactics and results. That's just picking. No, you don't really judge a manager by the team sheet. You judge a manager by the results that the team get. And we established, I think, beyond any doubt yesterday, with the help of a lovely chap, a lovely caller called Gavin, we established without any doubt yesterday that in terms of tactics and results, there's diddly squat. All you've got is the team sheet. So who's cheering Esther McVeigh's appointment today, even on the Conservative benches?
The only people cheering Esther McVeigh's promotion is the Labour Party, because if Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party can get together now, I think, and I say this as a not a Corbyn fan, but I think he's got good values, good morals and stuff like that. But if he can now, for me, reach out to the rest of his party and some of the people on the sort of the Blair wing of the party, I think this is a real chance for them, because I think he's still obviously speaking to an echo chamber, I think, of all the people that do love him. But if he can now go over that and reach out to all those Blairites and those good politicians he's got behind him on the backbenches, I think this is a real chance, because Esther McVeigh in DWP, beggars belief, and that's as someone who I think there are some really good Conservatives.
So is there any positive? I mean, I'll level with you. I'm late for the news, so the thing everyone's saying about Occam's razor and my suggestion that maybe she's trying to confect a situation in which Jeremy Corbyn has to carry the can for Brexit. Everybody led inevitably by Incorrigible FCA. Everybody is pointing out that there is a much simpler explanation that accounts for everything that's happened in the last 18 months. She's just not very good.
She isn't very good. That's it.
I mean, that's the world's worst phone-in.
She'd never been first choice. I think if it was only literally because everyone.
She was a rubbish Home Secretary, and she's a rubbish Prime Minister. Full stop. Next topic.
That's it. That's it, yeah.
It's only past, mate. I was trying to string this one out until 11.
No, well, you can see that for yourself. I mean, even in her race, her leadership, she was crowned it without anyone.
Let's do that then. Let's see if anyone thinks she's doing a good job, apart from the hedgehog fella earlier, who I still don't understand. Mate, I've got to go. Haven't you got any fires to put out?
No, I'm off.
That's it. Mind how you go. It's 10:31. And if you do dial that number, you will at this point in time get through to the studio, because the question we're asking doesn't actually admit many answers. Theresa May's reshuffle yesterday saw Jeremy Hunt refuse to move from health to business, and as a result of his refusal, he was rewarded with extra responsibilities for social care. Jeremy Hunt, not regarded, I think it can be fairly said, as the finest Secretary of State for Health in history. So he refuses to move and gets more words added to his job title. Justine Greening, who did indeed go to comprehensive school in Rotherham, actually, I read, and was Education Secretary, refused to move, in this case, to the Department of Work and Pensions. Hunt was supposed to move to business. Justine Greening refused to move to the Department of Work and Pensions, and after 2 hours of toing and froing with the Prime Minister, ended up resigning. So there's a double standard there that perhaps poses a question about what it is that Jeremy Hunt has on the Prime Minister, in the same way that Boris Johnson clearly has rendered himself unsackable. I'm getting bored of listing the things Boris Johnson has done that make him unfit for his office. Leaving aside Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe's unnecessarily enhanced plight, you've also got that comment he made at conference itself, the voice of British diplomacy, of course, suggesting that the war-torn Libyan city of Sirte could become a tourist destination once they, quote, clear the dead bodies away. Can we do... Why is he unsackable? Is it simply because he'd then launch a leadership bid? In which case you wonder why she still wants to be leader when she has no power. Why do you want to be in charge? Power. Not necessarily a negative thing. If you want to actually make changes, you need power. You need power to do anything in politics. She doesn't appear to have any. And I can't quite understand what's happening. Even if we use your interpretation of Occam's razor and say there's no big conspiracy here, there's no complicated theory unfolding, she's just not very good, then how can the party still allow her to continue, even after the disastrous result in the last general election, which she won, but it was disastrous by any objective measure, given where she should have been when she called it? Oh, curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. 0345 6060 973. I think we're going to talk to Dawn Butler shortly, the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equality, just to top and tail the very sad Toby Young story. That I know it sounds a little odd. I feel sorry for the fella now that the right thing has happened and he's gone. I look back on the last sort of 20 years of British media. I wonder, even with a first from Oxford and glittering privilege, born of his father, I just could you make a career in the British media now without being deliberately obnoxious? Just make a list of all the people who are most prominent, and then ask yourself whether they really mean the stuff that they say about disabled people or women or refugees or whatever it may be. Can you make a decent living, present company accepted, without being deliberately obnoxious in the British media? I think Toby Young is actually a victim of the kind of Bullingdon Club worldview that he would never have been allowed to join. And somewhere deep inside he knows that, and that explains something of his psychodrama. He's in awe of these proper toffs. He's in awe of the people in the Bullingdon Club. And while they're prepared to have him around as a court jester or a fag, he was never really going to be one of them, as he has now discovered. Joe Johnson and Boris Johnson still have their jobs. Toby Young doesn't. That's not right. 10:41 is the time. Matt's in Derby. Matt, back to the reshuffle or the night of the bendy spoons. What would you like to say?
I think the Occam's razor in this instance is somewhat double-bladed.
Go on, complicating an already tortured analogy.
So at first,
yes,
I didn't think so at first until what you said at the beginning of the show was hammered home by a couple of callers that came on before me.
Go on.
I think the simple answer is she's weak.
Yes. It's not even simple. Sorry to be such a worrier, but it's not a simple answer. It's simple in the first instance, but then you're wondering how someone possessed of such epic weakness can be continuing in any other period.
This is what I was. Yeah. This is my point. I wonder. Can you imagine if, say, David Cameron was still Prime Minister and he had told Jeremy Hunt to move aside and step to business? Can you imagine Jeremy Hunt saying no? I can't.
No. Or
I'm no
Tony Blair talking to John Reid, or Tony Blair talking to Blunkett, and them just refusing. No, I can't get past this either.
I'm no Conservative fan. I'm a card-carrying Labour member, but at the same time, I feel David Cameron is probably one of the stronger Prime Ministers we've had recently.
Really? You needed a coalition to get into Downing Street. David Cameron is the biggest disaster to befall British politics in 2 centuries. But anyway, let's not have that argument now.
I'm more talking within his own party.
You're talking about whether or not he could control his cabinet, and he clearly could, even though half of it was Liberal Democrat.
Not necessarily on policy or anything like that.
He could sack whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think we'd have the Boris Johnson debacle we have now if Cameron was still there.
No.
But the other side of it is what you said about Corbyn. I think there's some credibility to that now. There's a part of me that wonders, because of the structure of the Conservative Party, if there is somebody ready to step in that's palatable to the country, importantly.
That's it, you've done it. Because there he is, absolutely nailed by Matt. If she really can't sack Boris Johnson because she's frightened of a leadership challenge,
yes,
why doesn't Boris Johnson apparently want to be leader Enough. So you can't be simultaneously frightened of a leadership challenge while...
of the country.
No, but Boris Johnson doesn't want... If he wanted the job, he could launch a leadership challenge now. He doesn't have to be sacked to launch a leadership challenge. He could launch it as Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, he could. But I think he knows that what he's done over the past couple of years in the public spotlight makes him unpalatable to centrists.
Well, then he's sackable. Then he's sackable, mate. See?
He is, but I think...
This is like a snake eating its own tail.
I think May is worried about the Conservative Party disintegrating because I think there's quite a lot of people within the party who don't share that view, who feel that he probably could...
I'd have sacked him.
Maybe
I'd have sacked him.
No. I would for selfish reasons.
No, not for selfish reasons. If I was Theresa May, I'd have sacked him. I can't think of what priority has been prioritised by keeping him in the job, unless it's fear of what he could do from the outside of the cabinet, and that seems to me to be exaggerated, because he's doing so much damage within the cabinet. What's she going to lose by sacking him?
Backbenchers have a lot more freedom to speak freely than, say, somebody in cabinet does.
Really? I mean, he wrote a very off-message article about Brexit. He's made comments about clearing the dead bodies away as the voice of British diplomacy. He's endangered Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. What possible damage could be worse that he could inflict from the backbenches?
What he could do outside of cabinet, if that's the least he can do in cabinet. I mean, look at, say, someone like Nadine Dorries. Look at someone like Nadine Dorries.
No, I refuse. No one deserves that. Come up with a better example.
Well, she would...
No, I refuse to look at Nadine Dorries. Nobody has sinned enough in a past life to be handed down that sentence. She is... I mean, she's a politician that makes David Cameron look competent. Did you see the article? Did you see the thing she did with me last year?
No, I did not.
When she said no one should listen to him because he is a... I can't say the word on the radio. God, politics has gone down the sewer, hasn't it? I can't say on the radio what an elected member of Parliament said about me, but she called me a something public school posh boy something. And guess what?
What?
I went to the same school as her own daughters.
Well, the other
so that's why I'm not... Do that noise again. Do that noise. Can we record this noise? I want to use it. Do that noise again, Matt. No, it was louder than that. Try again.
I can't do that again.
Oh, come on.
It was a one-off thing. I can't.
All right. Go on.
But, before you cut me off, I would say this. One of your many box of troll types has discovered me on Twitter and keeps harassing me. So I just thought I would shout out to...
Well, don't worry about that, because you know and I know that please notice me, James, when it doesn't work. It's please notice me, Matt, in Derby, even though I kind of have no connection with you apart from the fact that we both listen to the same radio programme. Please notice me, Matt, in Derby. Please notice... Guess what? You've been noticed. Well done. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I love it when we talk about politics and the question actually evolves slightly. The conversation we're having about yesterday's reshuffle has evolved into a question of precisely why the Prime Minister is so powerless. I appreciate that her majority was decimated during the snap election that she said she'd never call, but, you know, politics is never a straight-railed business. There are always unexpected turns and detours. How has she ended up so powerless? A couple of you are suggesting that Boris Johnson is the big reason behind this. He is the big threat. He is the king across the water, and he doesn't want the job until Brexit is irreversible, because then he can sell himself or sell the unfolding problems as not being his fault. I don't know. Why is she so powerless? I think we're in agreement now about her competence, which is a tragedy for everybody in Britain. But how has she ended up so powerless? How has she ended up in a position where she can't tell her own cabinet what to do? I'll take more of your calls on this. I may carry it over the news. It depends how long this interview that I'm about to conduct lasts. Dawn Butler is the Labour MP for Brent Central, the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, and the poser of the urgent question yesterday that appears to have been the laxative which finally dislodged Toby Young from the board advising universities. Why, Dawn, do you think it took so long, given that most right-thinking people would have, at some point, as the catalogue of obnoxiousness continued, most people would have reached a breaking point? Not the government, apparently.
I'm totally sort of dumbfounded as to why it took so long. I think you touched on it earlier on in regards to our Prime Minister. She's incredibly weak. I mean, she's in office, but she has absolutely no power. I was expecting her over the weekend to say that you know, Toby Young's position is no longer tenable. You know, we made a mistake. We didn't do due diligence. And so we've asked him to step down. But instead she supported him and said, if he does it again. I thought, this is ridiculous. And so this is why I put forward the urgent question. And then yesterday, on the floor of the House, you know, it wasn't lost on me that I had to face Joe Johnson, you know, the minister, the university minister, and, you know, the brother of Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, who's best friends with Toby Young and used to be his editor. I mean, it was just shocking, really.
You're alluding to a suspicion of cronyism. Joe Johnson has described people unhappy with Toby Young's misogyny, discrimination against disability people, jokes about rape, jokes about masturbating in front of Comic Relief, articles discriminating against children in wheelchairs, describing special needs children as being illiterate troglodytes. Anybody unhappy with any of that? We haven't even mentioned the review of I, Daniel Blake in the Daily Mail that contained 5 factual errors. The newspaper itself, which is not normally quick to do such things, has subsequently corrected, although Toby Young himself has made no apology or correction. A man who makes up his own facts, clearly, in the context of public policy. Joe Johnson describes you as armchair critics, Dawn Butler. Is that fair?
I mean, isn't that shocking? I mean, they'll do anything to support their mates and their mistake. I mean, I raised 3 issues that need, and they still need to be answered, in regard to the process. How was the process conducted? Was due diligence done? There's a lot of unanswered questions around that. Suitability, was Toby Young suitable for the role? I mean, evidently he wasn't. And merit, is he there on merit, or is he there because he is mates, you know, of the Johnson brothers?
He's done. I mean, founding free schools is. I mean, it's no walk in the park, and there are 4 up and running as a direct result of his involvement. I mean, I know the first one had 6 heads in 4 years, and there are problems there, some of which have apparently led to his door. But the schools wouldn't exist if Toby Young didn't exist. It would be wrong to take that away from him.
Well, I'm not quite sure that the schools wouldn't exist if Toby Young didn't exist. I mean, but there's 800 free schools, so there's a plethora of people around if that's the only criteria. But you have to do, this is a public appointment. It's a paid public appointment. It's a government department that has will have over £1 billion to distribute. And so it's not just enough. And great. And I hope that this is a lesson to Toby Young. I hope that he will go on this journey that Joe Johnson talked about yesterday, and I hope that at the end of it, that he will be a better person.
This was a journey towards maturity undertaken by a man already in his mid-50s.
In his mid-50s, and 13 months ago. So they keep saying years and years ago. Well, all that shows to me is decades of somebody who has these outrageous and appalling views. But it was only 13 months ago that somebody had the courage to put a sexual harassment document on his desk and highlight certain paragraphs. Somebody did that just 13 months ago. And I'm supposed to be on a working committee in Parliament, changing the culture of Parliament around sexual harassment and bullying, and then the Prime Minister expects us to ignore this and ignore this appointment and let it go by. It's unacceptable. It's outrageous.
Are you suggesting she could have dispensed with him more easily if he wasn't Boris's buddy?
If she was a Prime Minister with power, then absolutely. But obviously, she's clearly shown she's a Prime Minister in name only, and it has highlighted. And this might send people flocking to be friends with Boris Johnson. Who knows? But it does kind of highlight that if you're a friend of Boris Johnson, that you'll be able to get a plum little job around the government.
Again, I would add to that, a friend of Boris Johnson who has been instrumental in the foundation of free schools, and universities are obviously part of the education system, but you're perfectly entitled to suggest that even with all of that on his CV, if he hadn't been friends with Boris Johnson, he probably would have been treated rather differently by the government. Before you go, Dawn Butler,
I'm waiting for evidence to show me that that's not right.
Fair enough.
That I'm wrong.
And speaking of evidence, have you got an answer out of the Department of Education yet about whether Joe Johnson knew about these public statements before making the appointment? Because we know the Prime Minister said on Sunday that she didn't. The appointment was made by Boris's little brother Joe. Do we know whether he had? Because I've only been asking for 5 days, so you'll understand I haven't got an answer yet.
I apologise for the lackadaisical attitude of this government. But I'm not really apologising for the government. It has nothing to do with me. But apparently yesterday he said he wasn't aware, if I remember rightly on the floor of the House, he said that he wasn't aware, which I find, really? Did he not make a decision? Was he not the one at the end of the day who said yes or no? There's some serious questions to be answered about.
Well, it's incompetence or complicity. Either he was aware but holds appointees to a lower moral standard than the Prime Minister, or he wasn't aware and he bloody well should have been.
Absolutely. I mean, it's beyond belief, but we have to get to the bottom of the process, because I want, for other people who are interested in education, I want students, I want people to be able to apply for these positions and get around that table. That's the kind of diversity I want to see around that table.
Dawn Butler, Secretary of State, Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, also with Angela Rayner wrote that letter last week and posed that urgent question in the House of Commons yesterday. I suppose this constitutes a result of sorts, but if you are a voter rather than a party politician, then a politician, you'll still want answers to some of these questions, which is about either incompetence or complicity. If you did your job, I don't know what you do for a living, but if you hired someone who proved to be unemployable, and the full weight of the British establishment and the Conservative government sought to resist the conclusion that he was unemployable, and you'd made that appointment after he fell on his sword, I think you would look to your record, wouldn't you? I mean, imagine if my boss here put somebody on air who was absolutely unemployable, and it would go back to them, ultimately. If I brought in a guest now who broke all sorts of laws, it would be down to me and the producer. If we had a guest on this programme now who brought us into disrepute, we would be duty-bound, I think, well, we'd be disciplined at the very least. Might get demoted. 10:59 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There can be few more damning indictments of the current state of British politics than the sheer predictability of what I'm about to tell you. I'm hearing that the International Trade Minister, Mark Garnier, who infamously instructed his secretary to go into a sex shop and buy vibrators, has lost his job as a Minister for International Trade. A few others as well. We'll catch up with Theo later, shall we? I know you always enjoy a bit of Theo time, our political editor, who will bring us up to speed with all the latest non-events to typify this reshuffle that wasn't. I want to talk about equal pay next. I don't know if you do, we'll find out. But I also urge you to look at my Twitter feed, at Mr. James OB, and look at the letter. Every time you think that things can't be as surreal as they appear to be, along comes David Davis with his great big crayon, writing incontrovertible evidence that things are even more surreal. David Davis is now writing to the Prime Minister to alert her that the European Union are preparing for a no-deal scenario with regard to Brexit. You will, I presume you will remember yesterday that Downing Street were briefing that there would be a Minister for No-Deal Brexit appointed. They have already said publicly that they could set aside £3 billion to prepare for a no-deal. Jim Pickard, the political editor of the Financial Times, has got his hands on this letter from David Davis to the Prime Minister that is essentially complaining that the EU is preparing for a no-deal scenario. Listen, even if you're still a fully paid-up member of the Brexit bandwagon, you have to take this on board, because this is our national security and our economic future that's at stake. The man who has essentially argued that we have to have the possibility of a no-deal dangling in front of us, otherwise they won't take us seriously at negotiations. You've heard it from the politicians, not just from people who ring me. You wouldn't be able, you've got to tell them that there's a no-deal possibility, otherwise they're not going to take you seriously.
And while I am confident that this scenario need never arise, while I am sure a positive agreement can be reached, I am equally clear that no deal for Britain is better than a bad deal for Britain.
To walk away from the European Union with no deal.
No deal is better than a bad deal.
But we cannot have a circumstance where the other side says they're going to punish you. So if that happens, then there's a walk away, and we have to plan for that.
That no deal is better than a bad deal.
But what I have said is no deal is better than a bad deal.
I coined the phrase in the referendum, no deal is better than a bad deal.
No deal is better than a bad deal.
No deal is better than a bad deal. As I say, no deal would be better than a bad deal. I think you can take it, Jeremy. No deal would be better than a bad deal.
He is now complaining that the European Union are preparing for a scenario in which no deal is signed. It also contains lines like this, which, frankly, unless you've been listening to this programme fairly religiously, this will beg a belief. I am writing to draw your and fellow members of the European Union Exit and Trade Committee's attention to a growing number of instances where the UK is treated differently by EU institutions. What the hell did you expect to happen when you voted to leave the European Union, David? The UK is being treated differently by EU institutions before we leave the EU, and in a way which is frequently damaging for UK interest. What? What's that? Leaving the European Union means we get treated differently from people in the European Union, and that is frequently damaging for UK interests. Oh my giddy aunt, colour me shocked. Who could possibly have seen that coming? Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. He goes on, the EU has adopted a number of measures that put agreements or contracts at risk of being terminated in the event of a no-deal scenario. What? No! You serious? You told the European Union that we're prepared to walk away with no deal at all, and they have put measures and agreements or contracts in place that accommodate the possibility of a no-deal scenario? Well, those dirty, rotten Johnny foreigners. Honestly, telling them that we were prepared to walk away with no deal, and then they have the gall, the audacity to actually prepare for that possibility? I'm with David Davis on this one. Who the hell do these people think they are? Unelected bureaucrats. I've had enough, seriously. Sooner we get our hands on our navy blue passports and watch our country decline at an exponential rate, the better. This would require UK companies to relocate to another member state. That's Project Fear, David. When people said that companies might have to relocate to an EU member state in order to retain the benefits of being a member of the European Union, that was Project Fear. Come on, somebody give him a call, will you? Give David Davis a call. Tell him it's all Project Fear. This stuff that's happening, and he's writing to the Prime Minister about. In addition, some EU agencies have published guidance to businesses outlining that the UK will become a third country when we stop being a member state in March 2019. This isn't funny. This isn't funny. David Davis apparently didn't realise that this was inevitable. You leave the European Union, you become a third country. There is no middle ground. There is no grey area. You leave the single market, you can wave goodbye to any arrangement currently enjoyed by the likes of Switzerland and Norway as well. This is a point that Jeremy Corbyn has completely missed when he says you can't be in the single market without being in the European Union, just casually dismissing the existence of Switzerland and Norway. I don't know who's actually worse. I just think we should reserve our most furious scepticism for the people who are actually in charge rather than the people who still apparently want to be. These say that compliance activity, such as the final quality control by a qualified person of each batch of medicine before it is released onto the market, would need to be based in the EU or EEA after exit. Well, I never. If only somebody had said all of this previously, and then it wouldn't have come as such an almighty shock to the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. I think we're moving into a period of British political history that is almost beyond rational analysis. This is a letter from the man personally responsible for floating the boat of no deal, walking away with no deal, and it is important that the European Union understand that we are prepared to do that, because if they don't think we're prepared to walk away with no deal, they've got us over a barrel, now complaining that they are preparing for the possibility of no deal being signed. But remember, we've taken back control. We've taken back control by giving every single scintilla of say on the future of our trading relationship with the largest single market in the world, 30% now, post the Japanese trade deal, of the entire planet's GDP, contained within one market, which we're walking away from. Or rather, they're preparing for the possibility that we're going to walk away from it because we've told them that we might. And now he's complaining because it would be disastrous for Britain, but he's still in charge of doing it. Every night I find myself wondering, is it time to stop, James? Is it time to stop? You very kindly suggest frequently that I'm pretty much the only voice in the British media that is allowed, really, by bosses to keep this position alive. I'm very flattered by that. A couple of things coming up this year that I feel incredibly humbled by. I think I'm going to be giving the Christopher Hitchens Memorial Speech at the Hay Literary Festival. He's one of my journalistic heroes, solely because of the work that I do in this field. Because everything I tell you is true. It's provably true. And yet, what, 80, 90% of the British media is still shouting the opposite in your other ear? Here you have the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, who has been personally responsible for igniting the very notion of us walking away with no deal, throwing his dummy, spitting his dummy out, throwing all of his toys out of the pram because the European Union appears to be accommodating the possibility of us doing the thing that he's told them we're prepared to do. And still some people think the Emperor is wearing magnificent robes, trimmed with the most beautiful ermine and topped off with a brooch of purest green. And there's just me at the back of the crowd, pointing at his peachy pink buttocks and insisting that he really has no clothes. Eventually everyone will have to agree, and by the time they do, no one will admit to having voted for the Emperor. Everyone will pretend that they didn't. It'll be the opposite of Woodstock. You know how 10 years after Woodstock, that magnificent music festival in America, 10 years after that, if everybody who claimed that they'd been there had been there, Woodstock would have sunk under the weight of human feet. Brexit's going to be the opposite. Give it a couple of years, no one will admit that they voted for it. Unless you're in my line of work, in which case, of course, you've publicly stated your support. That's not what we're talking about, although the phones have already started ringing. We'll save that for another day, because there's no point having a debate about this. I have described facts to you. You can either ring in and share my shock at these facts, or you can ring in and pretend that they're not facts, and that's just boring for everybody. I mean, even I am beginning to feel sorry for the people who ring in to defend Brexit and end up going all over the internet and being laughed at even by their family and friends. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. It would appear that there is no need for a retrospective revision of my analysis of that letter David Davis has sent to the Prime Minister complaining that the European Union believed him. Oh, God. That's it. He's just complaining that the European Union believed him when he said that we should prepare for a no deal. This government has briefed the Daily Telegraph that they were going to appoint a minister for no deal, announced billions of pounds worth of money to be spent on preparing for no deal, and allowed the more gullible half of the British electorate to believe that if we don't tell the European Union that we're prepared to walk away with no deal, then they won't do a negotiation with us that turns out to be favourable. And the European Union have responded by saying, oh, all right, then, we believe you, we'll take you seriously, you are prepared. Look, if you're prepared to leave, then clearly cutting off your nose to spite your face is going to become the new national pastime. It's probably going to replace Morris dancing, because we won't be able to afford bells anymore soon. So cutting off your nose to spite your face is becoming the new British national hobby. Therefore, we believe you when you say that you are prepared to walk away with no deal, even though everyone with a brain knows that would be absolutely suicidal. You've already done the first stage of national suicide, so why on earth wouldn't we believe you when you tell us that you're going to do the second? And then David Davis complains to the Prime Minister that the European Union are preparing for the no deal that he posited as a possibility. You think you're going mad when you analyse this stuff, and then you hear from Margaritis Schinas, who is the chief spokesperson for the European Commission.
Here in the European Commission, we are somehow surprised that the United Kingdom is surprised that we are preparing for a scenario announced by the UK government itself. After all, it was Prime Minister May herself who said in her Lancaster House speech in January 2017, and repeated in her Florence speech in September, that, and I quote, "No deal for Britain is better than a bad deal for Britain. It is right that the government should prepare for every eventuality," unquote. So we take these words by the Prime Minister very seriously, and it is therefore only natural that in this House we also prepare for every eventuality.
I'm just going to play you the top of that again, because the first 2 or 3 lines there, for me, are the very distillation of where we are now with Brexit. And every journalist in the country, possessed of a functioning intellect and a proper political compass, and indeed a moral conscience, should play you this clip until you can quote it verbatim from beginning to end. Because if you need to understand just how disastrous our handling of this process is, it's all here. And they don't hold us. There's no malice. It's as if they look at us and just... It's a bit like watching a mate go out with a girl that you know is cheating on him. And you're like, mate, look, stop it. Stop it. Stop. Do it. No. She's given me a blue passport. She's the one, mate. She's literally, she's sleeping with all of your. She's sleeping with everyone in the dog and duck. I don't care. She's got a blue passport, and she's the girl for me. Listen, just to the first couple of lines, and then you can scream at me for being the messenger. But surely this message has to get home eventually. Listen.
Here in the European Commission, we are somehow surprised that the United Kingdom is surprised that we are preparing for a scenario announced by the UK government itself.
That's it. There it is. We are surprised that the UK government is surprised that we're preparing for a scenario announced by the UK government itself. But at least you're going to get a blue passport that will contain fewer rights and privileges than the maroon one you've already got, and that is a good thing. And I mentioned to you earlier, I was going to unpick it today. It's all about getting rid of what's already there. People like me just so naively think that before you get rid of your car or your house or your wife or your husband or your job, before you do that, however much you hate your job or your wife or your car or your house, you don't get rid of it if you don't know what you're getting into next. But and this is, I don't know whether this constitutes an original thought or not, but 30 years of grooming by Boris Johnson and his mates, shilling for money, anti-EU rhetoric, having been fired from the Times for making up a quote from his own godfather. He got thrown another bone by his mates at the Telegraph, ended up in Brussels, started filing nonsense back to Britain about bananas, and he became a star. That's where it all began. All of it. And this is where it's led us to. This incredible situation where the European Commission has to express surprise that the UK government is surprised that the European Commission is preparing for a scenario announced by the UK government. And then he provides the quotes, the actual quotes from our actual Prime Minister, leaving people still banging the drum for Brexit with only really one option. They will have to pretend, in a Trumpian sense, that the Prime Minister never actually said the things that she was recorded on television actually saying. We need alternative facts to keep this ship afloat. But there we are. And the way to unpick it is just to get inside the mind of someone who hates their car so much because although it's a flawed but perfectly adequate car and the only car you've got and the best car you can afford, Boris Johnson has persuaded you that if you drive it to the scrapyard and stick it in the crusher today, then when you get home there'll be a BMW waiting for you in your drive. That is where we are now. That you need to get inside, if you, like me, struggle with the sheer scale of the absurdity and the incompetence that's engulfing our nation at the moment. You need to get inside the mind of somebody who doesn't care what they're replacing it with. They hate what they're getting rid of so much, although when you ask them why they hate it, every single one of their reasons for hating it turns out to be bogus, false or exaggerated. But they hate it so much they don't care what it's replaced with. And that should be a penny drop moment for anybody who, like me, has felt that they, quote, still don't get it. You still don't get it. I don't care how bad it is, the future, as long as it's not the past or the present. And that is how you can end up in a place where a Secretary of State can send a letter to the Prime Minister complaining that the European Union are preparing for a scenario announced by that Prime Minister. This is even beyond surreal now. This Kafka had get this sent back by his script editor for being too implausible. Yeah, I like the one about the bloke who woke up and had turned into an insect, Franz. But the idea that the European Union is going to end up getting gypped from our Brexit secretary for preparing for precisely the scenario that the Brexit secretary has posited, I think you should go back to stories about humans turning into insects, Franz, because you're just a little bit daft when you move into politics. That could never happen. Franz says to his publisher, have you seen his President of America, boss? I think you should let me.
However, if the outcome of the negotiation falls short of the deal that Britain needs, we will be ready for the alternative. That's what a responsible government does. Anything else will be a dereliction of duty.
Can you tell the committee whether the government has undertaken an economic assessment of the implications for the British economy and for British businesses of there being no deal?
Well, it made an estimate during the Leave campaign, or the sort of Leave, the referendum campaign, but I think one of the issues that's arisen is that those forecasts don't appear to have exactly been very robust since then.
Right, my question
is... Not since then. Not, the answer is, if you mean under my time, no.
It's interesting, this. I want to catch up on the latest reshuffle. It needs a slightly less profound word than reshuffle. What could we call it? What's like less than a shuffle? It's a cabinet fidget, yeah. It's a cabinet fidget. Theresa May has undertaken a cabinet fidget. We'll be getting out with the latest details of that fidget with Theo Usherwood shortly. He's down at Millbank and we're just making contact. Actually, let's do that now. Let's get it out of the way first, because if you're really interesting, Theo, I'll keep you here until Shelagh Fogarty. If you're of middling interest, it's nothing personal, because it's such a rubbish reshuffle. In fact, it's not even a reshuffle, it's a fidget. Who's been fidgeted this morning?
I don't think it is a rubbish fidget or re-fidget. I think it's very exciting. And the reason I think it's very exciting, James, is because...
Exciting? We're having quite a nuanced conversation about the meaning of words at the moment, Theo.
It's a disaster.
You want to double down on exciting?
Yeah, it's a disaster.
Okay.
It's a disaster. Theresa May has been dealing with the junior posts. The breaking news: Dominic Grieve, as I left Downing Street a few moments ago, was walking in.
No way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't.
Wow.
He walked straight past me, James, and I thought, oh my goodness,
Well,
he was carrying on for lunch.
Outrageous.
No, I thought he was carrying on for lunch. He just went straight into Downing Street.
Well, that's interesting.
And so we're very interesting because Dominic Raab, who of course was has moved over from justice to housing. It'll be interesting to see whether Dominic Grieve takes his job. And of course he was the arch proponent of Mr. Raab. So could he be brought into the government family to stop him rebelling against Theresa May? And that's
that's a cynical analysis. The other analysis could be: is it time that we actually got someone who understands British law into the Justice Department?
Yeah, and the other question, though, is will he take the job? Because, of course, he has been Attorney General and has held...
This would be lower.
And this would be a demotion. But would he be able to put any pride, and he's not a proud man, to one side, to be able to take a lesser job, to be able to influence government policy? The other news, Joe Johnson. Yes. He's been moved. He was at universities, and of course...
No, we're never going to get an answer to that question then.
Well, you might, James.
Go on, where's he gone now?
He's gone to Transport, but interestingly, he's also taken over the brief for Minister of State, Minister for London.
Oh.
And so you would be able to ask him to come on your show and answer questions about London, and then you could ask him about...
He could never get his brother out of the studio, you know. It was remarkable. He had a season ticket. It was like a revolving door. Never came out of the studio.
Well, you could invite him legitimately onto your show to ask him questions about London. Then you could ask him one. You could sneak one in about why he gave Toby Young a job.
Yeah, because that'll really surprise him now.
I let all the cats out of the bag at once. And then Alok Sharma, he's kept his job. Caroline Dinage has just been in, daughter of Fred Dinage, and she's going to have...
How?
That's going to be... How? Yeah, sorry. Sloth from this morning. Yeah, that's where we're at. I mean, it's Harriet Baldwin, as former government whip, has also been into...
So Grieve will definitely be offered something if he's gone in, won't he?
One would have thought so, yeah.
I mean, if they're in the middle of a reshuffle, he's not going to have popped in for a friendly fireside chat. So, and there is a vacancy at Justice, and it's hard to see. Good grief.
There's also a vacancy on the Office for Students.
There is now, a Universities Minister. What about Mark Garnier, the man who, of course, famously instructed his secretary to go into a sex shop in Soho and buy two... can I say vibrators on the radio? Well, it's a bit late if I can't.
He's been sacked. He's been sacked. There have been four departures this morning. Philip Dunn has resigned from Health as well. So there's 4 departures, and he's been the one who's been sacked. And of course, there's no way that he could have really kept his job. He was cleared by the Cabinet Office Inquiry, Whitehall Ethics Committee set up by Sue Gray, because of course he didn't send his secretary into the sex shop while he was a minister. And of course the ministerial code only applies to your particular time as a minister, so therefore he escaped censure on that part, but of course inevitably with a reshuffle he couldn't keep his job. It would have been...
When you say that, the official line isn't that he's been punished.
No,
the official line is that he's gone, but not because of that. But you are reading between the lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Telling listeners what it is you can see. So the big shot probably still Esther McVey, isn't it? Which is a remarkable appointment, given that everybody knows Justine Greening had already turned it down.
Yes, that is. It is a big shock for Esther McVey to take the job. And and I was in Parliament. I worked in Parliament in the House of Commons, as you know, before I came to LBC. And she was in the chamber this figure of. Infamous figure for Labour. She was so divisive in the way she approached disability benefits reform when she worked with Ian Duncan Smith at the DWP, and it's if Theresa May is trying to win over the Just About managings, to appoint Estimate Vade to the DWP as Secretary of State could be seen as a very strange choice if she is trying to say to the country that she's all about helping those...
Who else might have been in the frame for that?
Justine Greening was in the frame for that, clearly.
That's what I said, who else?
You could have gone... I mean, you could have just looked within the department. You could have appointed, of course, Caroline Dinage worked within the department. Yeah. Damien Hines, who's seen as straightforward, very capable, went over to education. You could have also moved Greg Clark over.
He refused to move, though, didn't he, from business?
But he wanted to stay at business because he didn't think he could get something else. And, of course, he was helped by the fact that Jeremy Hunt wouldn't take his job.
Well, just very briefly, because I did a whole hour on this morning, I'm not sure how much light we brought to the question. How can Jeremy Hunt refuse to do what the Prime Minister tells him? Just in your own words, what's the sort of layman's understanding of that curious tension?
Theresa May can't afford to create enemies. She has created an enemy, I think, in Justine Greening and the tweets that went out last night about wanting to hold the government to account, being put ahead of her political career.
Well, there's lots of room, lots of space over here.
But Theresa May can't afford to let somebody like Jeremy Hunt, who still has something of a following. He's seen as a reformer within the. Not perhaps as widely as somebody like Michael Gove or
oh, you mean within the party ranks?
Within the party ranks. I mean, he's not particularly liked outside of the party ranks, but doesn't matter. Within the party ranks, he can't be allowed to go to the back benches and form cliques. And of course, although he says now that he would vote to leave the European Union, he was staunchly in favour of remaining within the European Union during the referendum campaign.
And this concludes the cabinet fidget.
There's one other ducking to be mentioned, and that is that you'll know that prior to the reshuffle starting, there was talk of a Minister of State for no deal Brexit.
Yes, of course.
That would go into cabinet and update.
This is in conjunction with the £3 billion they announced they were going to start spending on preparation.
Exactly, James. But what's interesting about that and is that it would have seriously undermined David Davis. And I know that letter looked bad for David Davis in that he was seen as being hypocritical by saying, well, it's not right for the EU to plan for a no-deal Brexit. But that letter does, in effect, nix any idea, or would have nixed any idea that we could have a cabinet minister for a minister attending cabinet for a no-deal Brexit, while at the same time saying, well, it's grossly unfair that the European Union is preparing for a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, well, I mean, that doesn't let Davis off the hook. Have you heard what the European Commission have said in response to that?
Update me, sorry.
There you go.
And here in the European Commission, we are somehow surprised that the United Kingdom is surprised that we are preparing for a scenario announced by the UK government itself. After all,
is that, Theo Usherwood, just to pull back the curtain very briefly, do not look at the old man behind it, is that or is that not almost word for word how we together typified this letter before my programme started at 10 o'clock this morning?
Yes.
Thank you. That's it for another day. 12:58 is the time. My apologies to Giles and John and Archie and Ash and Leslie and Andy and Adam and Martin and Solomon and even Vivian in Clapham, who's been waiting to get on air throughout that conversation. In fact, we should at least say hello. Vivian, hello.
Hello.
Mate, we've run out of time.
James, as I said, I'm very angry. At 72, I think I have some input on your programme.
I think you're right, but we've run out of time. Can I give you a free pass, a golden ticket, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Next time we discuss something that we want to talk about, you tell Beth that you've got a golden ticket, Vivian, all right?
Very much.
Is that fair enough?
All right, then. Thank you.
No, thank you. There you go. I don't like unsatisfied customers unless it's a deliberate decision on my part to send them away unsatisfied with their asses whipped. That's it.
How long have you had a golden ticket rule? I like that.
I've just invented it now.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's great here.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It is, isn't it? I just have to remember. After now, Vivian will come on in about 18 months and I'll go, what are you talking about, you strange man? I've never had a golden ticket like the hedgehog fella 3 hours ago.
We heard you. We heard you. You can't deny it.
That's it from us for another day. Shelagh Fogarty is here to keep you company until 4 o'clock when Ian Dale will be assuming the position.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello, good afternoon to you. The reshuffle, the Downing Street reshuffle, is still going on. The outer reach reaches of it anyway, and we'll find out whether Dominic Grieve, who Theo was talking about a moment ago, is about to be made Justice Secretary. I read to you a moment ago Yvette Cooper's description of the reshuffle and where it left Theresa May. Dan Hodges, political commentator Dan Hodges, had this to say. She's hosting a cabinet meeting this morning with a health secretary she doesn't want, a business secretary she doesn't want, and a DWP secretary she didn't want. Yesterday, he said, was the night of the lame ducks. Well, it's still going on. Stay with LBC for the rest of the cabinet reshuffle. We're seeing, really, aren't we, in real time, what not having a Commons majority sometimes looks like. It led to the death of the grammar schools policy, the death of the dementia tax. And this reshuffle is proving, isn't it, that the authority of the Prime Minister is very much on the wane. Is she a puppet PM? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Here to talk about this with me for a few moments before I speak with you is Sir Gerald Howarth, former Defence Minister, former Conservative MP for Aldershot, and Peter Oborne, political columnist at the Daily Mail, amongst many other things as well. Good afternoon to both of you.
Good afternoon, Sheila.
I've read two kind of thumbnail sketches of the reshuffle so far, so I want to give you both an opportunity to provide one. You first, Sir Gerald Howarth.
Well, clearly it's not gone exactly to the Prime Minister's plan, but reshuffles are always difficult. They're also very testing experiences for Prime Ministers, because they're having to look friends in the eye and saying, look, sorry, I've got to move you on. And every reshuffle is a balancing act between preserving experience and taking the opportunity to bring on new talents, new faces, new ideas, if you like, refreshing the government. And it was never in question in this reshuffle that the top jobs were going to be changed in any case. But
that wasn't necessarily because Theresa May didn't want to. It was because she felt she couldn't, presumably.
Well, I think this Parliament will be dominated, characterised by Brexit. Inevitably, this is the biggest issue which has faced Britain for many decades, and getting that right, obviously, is going to be critical. Therefore, moving some of the key players, any of the key players in that operation, unless they have completely failed in their duty, would have been a mistake. You need continuity. We need our continental partners to understand that there's continuity in this government in dealing with Brexit. So, and I think there's been some, quite exciting changes. Esther McVey, she is
second choice
Northerner, and she's coming in with a fresh face.
Second choice. Oh, come on, Northern accent and a fresh face. Good Lord. What does that tell us about where the government's going?
Well, I'm just saying there have been some criticisms that Justine Greening was a Northern accent and a female and was removed. But what is really important, and it's quite interesting on Twitter, a lot of people, particularly women, are saying we don't want tokenism. We want the right people in the right job. Esther McVey, I think, will be, having already been a DWP minister, will be good.
All right, Peter Oborne, fire away your thumbnail sketch.
Well, when you play cricket, we just had the Ashes series, and the umpire raises the finger. It's conventional for the batsman to retreat to the pavilion. On this occasion, the Prime Minister raised the finger, and Jeremy Hunt
raised two back at her.
And they said, no, sorry, we're staying put. Well, I don't care what you think. Look, just imagine Maggie Thatcher calling in some minister saying, I want you out of your job, and I've got another job for you. You're going back to the backbenches. They jump. Gerald Howard knows this as well as you do. They jump, they'd be out of there, no time at all. But these ones, they don't really care what she thinks. They just says, no, Prime Minister, I'm staying put. In fact, in the case of Howard, he said, I want a bigger job. I want a different title. And she meekly, this is the lady who's supposed to be negotiating what Gerald Howard quite accurately has said is the biggest issue for generations. And when she has a negotiation, she gives in. It's pathetic. It's dreadful.
Oh, Gerald, it's pathetic. It's dreadful, says Peter.
Well, Peter is nothing if not emphatic, and Peter, marvellous to hear you on such good form. Of course, the Prime Minister is in a weaker position than my late beloved Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She was in a dominant position. When I came into Parliament in 1983, we had we had a majority of 140 Theresa May does not have a majority. Of course, unlike Angela Merkel, supposed to be the toughest, strongest leader in Europe, of course, she still has no government despite an election at the end of September. So, of course, Theresa May is in a more difficult position. And I think that there was a case for moving Jeremy Hunt. On the other hand, it has to be said, and I understand from my own son-in-law, who is a parliamentary private secretary, James Cartledge, in that department, that he's been very impressed with Jeremy Hunt. And I think that, again, in the health service, it's probably an advantage in having continuity rather than bringing in a fresh face who's got to understand all the vagaries and difficulties of the health service. So difficult, I know, not ideal. I agree with Peter on that.
And Peter, if Theresa May brings in, for example, Dominic Grieve, who we've seen going into number 10, if she brings him in as Justice Secretary, given that he and others very publicly voted against the government recently on Brexit, on a matter of Brexit, will that be regarded as strength or weakness within our own party?
Well, I think actually Dominic Grieve as Justice Secretary would be a glorious appointment because he's a really distinguished lawyer. He was wonderful when he was at Justice in a more junior position until quite recently. And actually, he would, I think, be a wonderful appointment. And actually, and I'm not saying this is why the Prime Minister is doing this, but once he joins the government, of course, he can't vote against her anymore. So that would be one less rebel.
I thought that David Gauke had been appointed Justice Secretary. Has that changed?
Peter?
Well, we'll see what's happening. And maybe it's that we're talking about one of the junior posts. But if that's the... If he's going back into that role, or any role in the government, he can't vote against it.
No, you're absolutely right. And I also agree with you. I think that that Dominic is a good lawyer. And when we were in opposition, I had experience of working with him, and I found him to be very good then. And unlike some of my colleagues who think he was sort of traitor and all the rest of it, I do actually think that he has a view and he expresses himself articulately, and that is what you're supposed to do in Parliament. They're all supposed to be ciphers. And I think there will be a great advantage in having inside the tent, because you're not able to do what inside the tent what you can do outside the tent.
Well, did any of the colleagues who regarded him as a traitor, are any of them in the Cabinet, as far as you know, Sir Gerald Howarth? Because that could be tricky.
I couldn't possibly comment on that. I wouldn't know. Can I just say that...
Well, you've just said they regard him as a traitor. They must have told you that.
It's what I've read in the media, and I don't trust everything I hear about in the media. Though, of course, I do respect everything that Peter Oborne says. But let me just say one to your listeners, a couple of other things. There are some changes which I'm sorry about. There's Philip Dunn, who's been a health minister, was standing in yesterday for Jeremy Hunt. Philip was a superb minister there. He was a superb minister at Defence. And I'm sorry that he has gone, and I hope it's not because some of these older, white-haired, white-faced men have been removed in order to make way for what might be seen to be tokenism. It is terribly important. We're not conducting a sociology class here. We're choosing people, men and women, to fashion the destiny of this country, and the Prime Minister has got to resist the temptation to appoint people as tokens. She's appointed an excellent man, Londoners will well know, James Cleverly, Member of Parliament for Braintree, former Territorial Army officer, and he has been appointed as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. I think that's a great move. He's a talented guy, I know him extremely well. He's not a token appointment, but that must be resisted.
Is Esther McVey with her northern accent a token appointment? Can you list her qualities in the same way you just...
No, I don't think she is, because she's worked at the DWP as a minister before. It's a difficult department. It's very technical, as well as being politically challenging. And I think she's got the qualifications to do that, and I don't think she's a token appointment at all.
Peter Oborne, are we en route to having a puppet Prime Minister if people can sit there and put two fingers up to her when she puts the finger up for them to leave?
I don't think she's a puppet, a Prime Minister at all. But what I do think is that she is weakened by her position, that she has She hasn't been ruthless. I mean, for instance, it wasn't much of a secret that she wanted to unload the Chancellor of the Exchequer and Philip Hammond. I rather would have liked her to have done that as well. And she clearly didn't feel she had the strength even to have a go at that one. That said, there are encouraging signs about this. I mean, Esmond McCabe is a really sparky lady, and I think she's potentially a very good welfare secretary. There's a man nobody's heard of called Lidington. He's going to actually be running the country from now on. He's going to be in charge of the Cabinet Office, but really that means Deputy Prime Minister. He'll be behind the scenes, and he's very capable. Lidington.
He left Justice, didn't he, to go to that role?
He did, yeah. And he's going to off in, and he'll be running all the cabinet committees and making sure Downing Street works. Now, that's badly needed because, as we learned yesterday, for the most incompetent reshuffle, really, in memory, I mean, it made Blair's reshuffles look really rather hot stuff. I mean, Lidington, somebody's got to sort out Downing Street, and Lidington is the man to do it. Nobody's heard of Lidington.
Okay, you say she isn't, Theresa May isn't a puppet prime minister at this stage, but can she wrest back the authority that she's lost in so many different ways since that election defeat?
Well, I think she has been doing that at the end of last year. The budget wasn't the calamity we were getting used to under Hammond. Then we had some form of resolution of the trade negotiations in Europe. And really, she went into Christmas in good shape. But somehow she lost control of the reshuffle yesterday, which has, we have to admit it and accept this, been damaging. But I think now that she isn't finished by any manner of means. If she can take things forward, she's got a new party chairman. I mean, that's a positive thing. There was this completely useless person called Patrick McLaughlin, who was hopeless beyond belief. Membership,
who had wanted to leave it for some time, hadn't he?
But membership of the Conservative Party under him was plummeting down to 70,000. I mean, it couldn't even fill a football stadium. And now Lidington, this man who's going to come in and take charge of Downing Street and the Cabinet Committee. So there are aspects of it. I mean, there is reason to hope that things can get back on course.
OK, Peter Oborne, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Sir Gerald Howarth, former Defence Minister and former Conservative MP for Aldershot, apologies. 0345 6060 973. Peter Oborne says Theresa May is not yet a puppet Prime Minister. Do you agree with him? 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Another bit of reshuffle news, if it hadn't filtered through to you already. Joe Johnson, the brother of Boris Johnson, was Universities Minister. He's moving to Transport, and he will also be, under that department, Minister for London. So that will be fun for Sadiq Khan. It's 17 minutes past 1. Authority is a bit like confidence, isn't it? They can ebb and flow quite easily, and you can lose them and not really be sure how it happened. I mean, I think we're pretty sure how some aspects of Theresa May's authority draining away has happened in recent months since the general election, and the lack of the Commons majority. We can get a sense of where that might come from. But it just seems to me that when Theresa May, even if you look at when she's interviewed on radio or television, she does seem, to my mind anyway, just in terms of how she communicates, to me she communicates like somebody who's quite fearful. She's fearful that something she says might just blow up in her face. And I think it's almost as though, and you saw it in the election and you see it in interviews as well, that it's almost like she hasn't learned that the British public really do warm to. Think of Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example. People do warm to somebody who plainly says things as they see them, as they think them, as they feel them. People warm to that. And of course a politician has to be more judicious about what they say, more careful about how they communicate. But when that carefulness becomes almost like a terror of saying what you think, and to my mind, she does sometimes seem terrified to say what she thinks. To say, think of the Toby Young situation. He's resigned from his post on the Office for Students, as a board member of the Office for Students. We'll talk about that with Giles Corrin after 1:30, actually, the journalist for The Times, Giles Corrin. When she was asked about Toby Young and whether he should remain on that board, whether that was a sound appointment, she didn't seem to have... She said she didn't like the tone of the tweets, but you got no sense that she was prepared to say anything beyond that. I mean, who would like the tone of those tweets? But she never quite felt... It's almost like her authority is deep inside her rather than being exercised and wielded outside of her in the world. That's how I read the woman when she goes about her business. And this reshuffle, I think, is an extension of that. If you are saying to somebody, I, as the Prime Minister and the leader of this party, no longer want you in this cabinet, and that person walks out of the door, not just still a member of the cabinet, but with additional roles attached to the job you wanted them to leave, you have no authority in that moment, do you? You've either lost it or just handed it over to someone else. Is Theresa May a puppet Prime Minister? Peter Oborn says no. What do you say? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Lucy has called from Reigate. Hello, Lucy.
Gosh, do I agree with you, Sheila. She seems frightened of the public. She seems frightened of the cameras. She's got a weak face. She needs to be strong now, and I've lost my confidence in her totally, especially with Jeremy Hunt. He can't run the National Health Service, and yet he's got a social care. How can she do that? There's people dying on trolleys and everything else, and she's giving him social care. I'm in my latter life at the moment, and I feel for myself now.
Did you have confidence in her to start with in those early days when she became parent? No?
Well, I thought I'd give her a chance, but when she's on camera, it's as if she's frightened of everything. We don't need somebody like that. But my husband and I were talking, and I said, if she goes, who could take over? And we both looked at each other. I don't know. But with Jeremy Hunt, he can't run the National Health. That poor lady that called an ambulance.
In Essex, yeah.
Yeah. And she died because they didn't turn up for 4 hours. There's another lady that's died on a trolley in a hospital, and she's given him social care. She should have said to him, sorry, you can't run the National Health Service. You're not doing that. And he's doing social care.
Do you think we have genuine leadership then in this government or not? Because if it's leadership by committee, it's not leadership, is it?
No. I'm losing it with this country. If I could go abroad at my time of life, I don't know where I'd go. This country is losing it with knife crime, NHS, and she hasn't given us a new government that we really, really need.
All right, Lucy. Thank you, Lucy in Reigate. Tim in Colchester, hi.
Hello, Sheila. Nice to speak to you for the first time.
You too. You're welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make the point that I think that the people talking about Theresa May not having any authority in Cabinet because of the reduced majority, I think that's something of a red herring. I think the reason that she doesn't have any authority in Cabinet is because, unfortunately, her colleagues just don't respect her. And I think part of the reason that they don't respect her is that they feel that she is probably too tolerant of certain people who might misbehave. It's rather like a workplace where the boss tolerates certain people and then pretty much everybody else in the team loses respect for them because they're not prepared to crack down on the people who go off message.
Why don't they have any confidence in her? What is it about her that you think they don't? I mean, that they made her their leader.
Well, I think, one of the things that's I think sort of quite glaring is the way she deals, for example, with Boris Johnson. She clearly has demonstrated that she can't sack him, she can't discipline him or sort of slap him down in any sort of way. And he's seen within Cabinet to pretty much get away with whatever he wants to do. And I think other members of the Cabinet have thought, well, I don't respect somebody who treats somebody who's supposed to be part of the team like that. I mean, if I were to use a football parlance, I'd say that she's lost the dressing room.
She's lost the dressing room, but that really, well, it matters in a football club, but it matters enormously in government, doesn't it?
In any workplace, doesn't it? I think it matters in any workplace. It doesn't matter whether it's a Premier League football club, or whether it's a sales office, or whether it's the cabinet office. Unless the team respect the leader, and the leader doesn't have to sort of shout and bawl and throw teacups everywhere, but they have to be seen to be someone who is consistent and who will listen and who will deal with problems and deal with people equally. If you have sort of favourites, or if you have people you think are untouchable, then everybody in the rest of the team thinks, well, I'm sorry, what, if they're untouchable, why should I listen? Why should I listen to you?
And do you agree with my previous caller on Jeremy Hunt, not just insisting he stayed in the job she wanted him to move from, but getting more responsibility as well? What does that tell us?
It makes me wonder what he has on her, to be quite honest. It's quite surprising. I mean, James was making the point sort of earlier that he's obviously very much well liked within the Conservative Party, even if he's not particularly liked outside the Conservative Party. But he must clearly have some sort of strong base and be very confident of his position, that he can turn around to the Prime Minister or the boss and to say, no, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do.
And does it matter more than, because obviously, there's a limit to which the machinations of the Conservative Party matter a jot in the day-to-day lives of most people, but do you believe it does matter that the Prime Minister has actual authority, not just within the country, but within her party?
But then how can she look at fellow leaders within the EU or around the world and put Britain's case forcefully if she can't control her own cabinet? As I say, it's a little bit like, let's say, for example, Arsene Wenger saying, yes, I'm a strong and stable leader of Arsenal Football Club and I'm going to lead Arsenal Football Club to glory. If, for example, just hypothetically, Alexis Sanchez or Mesut Ozil were to say, no, boss, we're not going to do what you say, we're going to do what we want to do.
OK, Tim, thank you, Tim, in Colchester. She's lost the dressing room. Is he right? 0345 6060 973. The number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. We'll hear from Giles Corran in a moment, journalist for The Times, who believes that Toby Young, who has resigned today from the appointment, I'm not sure he ever took up the post, really, in any real sense. He was on the board of the Office for Students appointed by the then Universities Minister Joe Johnson. He's left the job, he's resigned from the post because of complaints about his suitability for a job in public office. Giles Corran believes that is entirely the wrong outcome, so we'll talk to him in a moment. Rory Stewart, the MP, Conservative MP, has become Minister of State at the Ministry of Justice, so he's the Justice Minister, not Dominic Grieve. He is a Remainer in terms of how he voted in the... he was actually absent, I'm told, for the referendum vote, but he was a supporter of Remain. He says Britain, though, now must make the best of Brexit. But in terms of the cabinet balance, I suppose he's a Remainer. I'll get back to your calls on the reshuffle and the Prime Minister's authority as a result of it in just a moment. But one thing to note, Joe Johnson, who was Universities Minister, is now moving to Transport. But Joe Johnson was also the man who thought it was appropriate to appoint Toby Young, and maybe you agree with him. It was appropriate to appoint Toby Young, the journalist and founder of Free Schools, amongst other things, to the board of a new university regulator. Well, Toby Young, after a lot of pressure and a lot of comment about his own previous comments on Twitter and in other places, has decided to resign from the post before he even really took it up. There had been a petition calling for his dismissal, had gathered over 200,000 signatures. I'm joined by Giles Corran now, columnist for The Times, who believes this is the wrong outcome altogether. Giles, hello.
Hi. I don't know that I believe it's the wrong outcome, Toby not doing the job. I think it's the inevitable outcome. I don't think he sort of... It's hard to imagine he chose to resign. I think the result of all the scrutiny on his frankly pretty revolting Twitter feed of the last 10 years means he's functionally finished in public life, and I hope it doesn't harm him as a journalist. And I feel a certain human sympathy for a chap who's occasionally outspoken in the way he expresses himself. But I mean, what a fool to have thought the office in the first place, I think, because people like us, and I sort of hesitate to bracket myself publicly, but people like us probably shouldn't be seeking offices like that.
Why?
Well, because if you make a living sort of from voicing opinions in the paper and on Twitter, and well, Twitter doesn't pay you, but if you've made a living doing that, the chances are you've said a lot of things that you don't really believe just to get attention. I personally have to write 3 different opinions every week, 150 opinions a year. I don't hold more than about 7 opinions, so the other 143 have to be something else. Variations in that opinion. I usually defend myself that I express an opinion, not necessarily my opinion. I don't set out to provoke. I mean, Toby sets out to offend. I set out to sort of provoke thought and occasionally unintentionally offend and don't really mean to. Toby has written and been had up publicly for writing things that are racist and homophobic, which is not something I've ever done. He's a self-declared Tory, which I'm certainly not. But it's just once you've made a living being outspoken and expecting people to sort of laugh and roar and shout and clap and boo, you can't then expect to go into a serious position in anything remotely like government, I don't think.
So you don't regard the tweets as anything other than just a sort of misfortune, really, in the long run? You don't regard them as deeply offensive or...
Oh, yes, no, they are. They just reveal that Toby's a bit of a knob, which, frankly, Theresa May... I'm staggered. I don't know Toby that well, but I'm very surprised all the sort of ad feminam stuff of particular female MPs that he spotted on the telly and made remarks about their breasts. I don't understand how any gentleman, Tory or Labour or left or right, could possibly tweet things like that.
Well, it's the kind of thing you see from people you then block on Twitter, isn't it? Because you think, good Lord, these people are grim.
Yes, I mean, you do. Toby made those mistakes. Well, he called them sophomoric, which is a word designed to antagonise people because it's sort of polysyllabic and basically meaningless. But he did it in the early days of Twitter. He thought he was being funny. He thought it was locker room humour. I made 1 or 2 mistakes early on. I think you can be held to account for the things you write on Twitter. I think what's sadder or less fair is that the extent to which Toby has been deemed unfit for office because of things he wrote in newspapers and magazines. Because that's your job, and that you're writing things which your editors asking you to write, and stuff which your editor is saying that you're generating debate, you're being paid for it, you're putting food on the table. I think that shouldn't disqualify you from being considered a round human being. Twitter really is who you are. Twitter is the desperate screamings of your unconscious in the middle of the night. It's shown.
Well, it depends how you use it. I use Twitter a lot, but I regard it as broadcasting. And I apply the same rules.
Oh, do you? Well, I do completely the opposite. So I endlessly have people complaining about my language on Twitter. And they go, oh, you could have done that without it. I say, no, I spend my life broadcasting for the BBC, writing for the Times. I have to express myself in very elegant and erudite and somewhat bland terms some of the time. Twitter's where I say I really use the strongest possible language. But luckily, because I say it reveals your unconscious, luckily I am not homophobic and not racist. So nothing...
And have no desire for public office at this stage.
And no desire for public office. But what I was going to say is I thought I wasn't sexist. But as the news story has moved on in the last year or two, the sands have shifted. The tide's gone out a bit in the old Warren Buffett analogy and see who's wearing underpants. And some of the things that I once tweeted are now starting to look a little bit sexist. And that's one of the crimes you can commit these days. And I thought I wasn't. But I'm beginning to worry if maybe I am.
Well, maybe you should apply some rules to your tweeting, Giles. Maybe not. Be less entertaining. Thank you very much indeed. Giles Corran, columnist for The Times. Interesting. There was a piece by Brendan O'Neill. I think I tweeted it. If not, I will do. In which he saw it rather in a more sinister way than Giles Corran sees it. He believes that a mob has basically shouted out Toby Young from this role in public life. Thank you anyway to Giles for talking to us. Bill has called from East Grinstead. Back to our topic of Theresa May and her authority or lack thereof in the Conservative Party, in the government. How do you see it, Bill? Is she a lame duck Prime Minister? Is she a puppet PM?
Well, she's having a hard time because she's working in a difficult environment where people don't have faith in her work. But actually, I think she's great. She's doing a terrific job. And she's standing up to a lot of pressure, and she's got an answer for everything. It doesn't always match up to everybody's expectation. People think that everything is perfect, but she's got a limited finance resource at the moment with the Brexit is pushing down the value of the pound to a certain extent, and it makes it difficult for trade.
Do you really think she has an answer for everything, Bill? Do you not think a lot of her answers amount to just noise and words and no actual sort of meat on the bone?
Well, she has put the meat on the bone where she's got the resources and the support. Now, she gets blamed for everything. Somebody didn't get an ambulance in time. Oh, blame the Prime Minister. Come on, let's be reasonable. The thing is that we're running a very good health service. We have terrific pressure at the moment because we haven't got the resources. So what does she do? Well, she puts
less in than is required, Bill, is the answer. She puts less in than is required.
That aspect of things, which is one answer. And I think she's at least recognising the problem and she's doing something about it. She recognises the problem with the EU negotiations for Brexit, and so she's setting up a department which will deal with the situation if we have to completely leave without a deal.
OK, Bill, clearly a fan of Theresa May. I would argue there's some rose-tinted spectacles scenario going on in a couple of points, but there you go. Bill thinks she's doing okay. She's certainly withstanding pressure. That's demonstrably true. Stuart in Sheffield says Theresa May is merely demonstrating that she, like David Cameron before her, are fishes out of water in the Tory party. She believes fervently and passionately in nothing, says Stuart. And Mikey says, as weak as May is, she has surrounded herself with much worse opinions. The Prime Minister could have brought in much worse options. The Prime Minister could have brought in Jacob Rees-Mogg and Kwasi K, but too terrified to do so, too terrified of the competition, says Mikey. 0345 6060 973. How much has this reshuffle, or lack thereof in some cases, drained the Prime Minister's authority? Is she a puppet PM? 0345 6060 973. It is 1:45. Ozan has called from Hammersmith, though, to talk about Theresa May's authority. Does she have any left, Ozan?
My issue with Theresa May personally is with Justine Greening. She's in a constituency near me in Putney. Theresa May has been for the advancement of grammar schools, and Justine Greening publicly hasn't. And I think Theresa May calling Justine Greening patronising and disagreeing with her own view and basically demoting her, moving her to working pensions, I think that's the only reason why she's moved there, because she disagreed.
And then she rejected the move, didn't she, Justine Greening? She said no to the new job.
Exactly. Just for disagreeing with Theresa May, she's moved there, which I believe Justine Greening is right with not advancing in grammar schools. And just for disagreeing with her, she's moved there, which I think is completely ludicrous.
The grammar school policy had died a death anyway, hadn't it, because of the election results? She just knew she wouldn't get the support for it.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think I'm personally 20. I'm personally what you call a young voter between 18 and 24. I mean, I'm not right-leaning, I'm not left-leaning, I'm more centrist, but I'll definitely, it definitely did die after the election. It's just she's trying to surround herself with people who people who agree with her, rather than people for the right or for the right of the country, if that makes sense, what's doing right.
Are you concerned, though, that if her authority is draining away, that actually that means the government's authority drains away, that means Britain's authority drains away? Because leadership has to count for something, doesn't it? Or it is puppetry, it's nothing.
I think it is kind of a slight puppet, because I don't think she does have any authority, really. Genuinely, she does not have any authority whatsoever. She has a minority government, which God knows how long that will last, let's be honest. And if she's surrounding herself with people who agree with her, possibly later on who disagree with her. Theresa May appointed Justine Greening as Education Secretary, then 18 months down the line, she's making her move. what she does the same with the next cabinet reshuffle.
All right. Ozan, thank you. It's obviously the education aspect that bothers Ozan. Somebody's tweeted here. There's no name attached to it. Oh, no, apologies, there is. W. Matata on Twitter says, this reshuffle leads me to yet again question the Prime Minister's judgment. She knows anything that she touches falls apart, so why do it now? She could have waited until after the EU deal. All she had to do was redistribute Damien Green's brief, says W. Matata, who describes himself as gobsmacked. Nigel has called from Great Yarmouth. Hello, Nigel.
Hello, Sheila. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You don't believe Theresa May is a very confident woman. Why not?
No, I don't. I think she's very inexperienced, and I think she lacks the knowledge and the confidence to run the country. And I think she also surrounds herself with people who are possibly giving her advice. She's just not forceful enough.
Forceful enough, what, to be a leader, to be Prime Minister, to make the difficult choices?
To be a leader, yeah. I mean, it's the number one position, and you have to make tough decisions, and people have to respect you. And I don't feel she comes across in that manner.
And if she did what she reportedly wanted to do, if she got rid of Boris or moved him from the Foreign Secretary role, if she got rid of Philip Hammond and moved him as Chancellor, you know there would be big political ramifications within the House of Commons, within her own party, for her. So maybe it is
It would, yes.
But maybe it is a cool-headed decision to not do that, rather than a fear-based one.
I think she relies very heavily on advice from other people, and she sits in the middle like middle management and tries to please everyone, and you can't do that.
Oh dear, she's a middle manager. Thank you, Nigel. Nigel in Great Yarmouth. Roy in Eastbourne, is she?
Hi. A good description. Now, I think unprecedented. We have a government, we have a party in power at the moment where at the moment nobody wants to be Prime Minister because they know that in the present circumstances the Prime Minister's got to be somebody with vision, you know, that it can inspire people, and that's beyond the wit of any modern politician. So they looked around for a patsy, and they found a very willing volunteer in Theresa May, who is convinced that she's a mover and shaker. But she's nothing of the sort. We're not being run by a Prime Minister at the moment. We're being run by a committee. What I think a few years ago we'd say men in grey suits. They're running the Conservative Party. The Cabinet is picking itself. And poor old Theresa, I think George Osborne, who I've got no time for, was absolutely right. She is a dead woman walking. She can stay there till March 19, and then she'll be dropped because all politicians of any hue think that after March 19 we can get back to the old politics, you know, and nobody needs to be a vision. You know, they just can go back to being career politicians.
So the slow drip feed of pain, they're just prepared to put up with for another 15 months.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. As long as she's there taking the flak, that's fine, and then they'll just drop her, because whatever, good or bad, whatever decision we come to in March 19, there will be enough fuel there to say that she's gone the wrong way, and they'll drop her. The great shame is that there must be somebody in the Conservative Party who could put their head above the parapet now, and people would just jump at them and follow them.
Well, it depends. There's more than that to think of, isn't there? There's Brexit to think of, there's the nation to think of, there's prompting a general election that they don't want to do.
Well, no, it's the real people dealing with Brexit are people whose names we don't even know, and people like, say, David Davis, and you know, people like that, Boris. But what they need is a patsy up front to take the blame for everything. And
do you think she loves being Prime Minister,
absolutely.
Oh, you do, okay, or does she realise that to leave it is to essentially abandon ship?
No, she believes that she's there on her own merits and that she's a great mover, because she can certainly talk the talk, but it just goes pear-shaped after she's finished talking. You know, what happened to these 12 key points, you know, that were going to be a part of our Brexit campaign? Do you remember back, was it last January? They've gone. You know, no, and you know, no, she's being led by the nose, but she is convinced herself that she is the great mover and shaker. She can't see that she's a puppet.
And you believe she is absolutely a puppet?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The next Prime Minister has probably already been picked and will be there in March 19.
Who is it?
It may be somebody we've never heard. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it wasn't somebody like Rees-Mogg.
Well, we've heard of him, haven't we? Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've heard of him in the sense that he makes good copy to write and talk about. But, you know, the many grey suits in the background, they've got the future planned, and it doesn't involve Theresa May.
Oh, harsh words from Roy in Eastbourne. The only caller, though, this hour who is prepared to put his money where his mouth is and say, yes, she is a puppet Prime Minister. Most of you either thinking that she's absolutely fine where she is and doing a great job, or one or two of you anyway, others thinking that she's, yes, bruised, but not quite out yet. Down, but not out. She's damned if she does. Sack screening from education, and damned if she doesn't. Hunt from health, says Martin in Rochester. Thanks very much for your texts and tweets.